So the head of the ADL, Jonathan Greenblatt, gave a couple of interviews, a long one with the New York Times, which caught a lot of attention. But the first clip we want to start with was actually from a different interview where he expresses concern over intermarriage. Let's take a listen to that.
But this is why we need a revolution in our community on so many levels. So look, the reality is that intermarriage rates continue to go up. Assimilation continues apace. And look, I fight anti-Semitism. That is my job. Right. But I worry a great deal about broader questions of Jewish identity, as I think we talked about over lunch.
So concerned about intermarriage, which is interesting because if we put this next piece up on the screen, remember ADL is supposed to be a civil rights organization. This is from their website, concerning over white supremacists who fear and hate the concept of multiracial couples, relationships, or families, believe that such relationships pollute the pure white race. As a result, a fairly common white supremacist symbol depicts a multiracial couple or family with a red circle or bar superimposed over the depiction, indicating that such relationships ought to be prohibited. So, yeah, I don't know what to tell you. My commentary on this was, I think it just should be abundantly clear at this point that if you are committed to sort of basic liberal, classical liberal values, Zionism and classical liberal values cannot coexist. And that relationship has become increasingly untenable. And when you see comments like this, I think it underscores that fact.
Well, I mean, there's so much to say about it, which is fascinating. So first of all, is it okay to say? That's actually a very interesting debate. And so I was talking about it with some Jewish friends, and they're like, listen, even though it's Greenblatt, this is a very common sentiment in the Jewish community. I was like, okay, so let's talk about that. Why? And it's like, well, we're concerned about Jewish identity, and we want to make sure that the Jewish story of the last 6,000 years gets carried on. I said, okay, I think that's entirely reasonable for, let's say, a Jewish rabbi or others to talk about. Now, even in terms of actualizing it in America, I think it's a big problem, but I'll return to that. But John Greenblatt is talking about this in the context of support for Israel. And actually, really what he's saying is that people who are half Jews or people who marry outside of their religion are not real Jews, and thus they are polluting support for Israel in America. And that's what I find actually deeply distasteful and really gross. This is, let's all be honest, this is a common sentiment amongst recent immigrant arrival communities in the United States. It was common amongst the Irish back in the 1900s, common amongst the Italians. Intermarriage between the two was seen as sacrilegious, especially with the Protestants, Lithuanians, Slovenians, Eastern Europeans, etc. Obviously, it took a while and everybody pretty much got over it. It's common today amongst the Indian community. It's common amongst the Muslim community. It's common any ethnic subgroup, especially one which is tightly controlled value. Chinese Americans, I'm sure Japanese Americans, I'm sure had the same story. And then of course, over 5-6 generations, things kind of peter out. The problem that I find in it, and this is returning to your liberal story, is that it is one fundamentally which is talking about the preservation of Jewish identity, in his particular case, Zionism and support for Israel in the United States, and not wanting to basically, quote, assimilate, which he says is a bad thing, into the broader American project and story. I think that's really bad. People have the right to do what they want. But in terms of what we should say is part of the so-called melting pot, etc., is not one which actively goes out of its way to say that ethnic subgroups, and in this particular one which he wants to preserve for loyalty and support for a foreign state, is quite literally the subversion that Theodore Roosevelt talked about, hyphenated American, in his speech on hyphenated Americanism back in the early 1900s. And that's the big problem that I have broadly with what he's saying, because he is talking about it in the context of support for Israel. And that is one where, by the way, if you're Jewish, you should be so insulted by this, because you're basically saying, hey, don't go and marry some filthy goy, you know, and to make sure that your kids are going to grow up to be pro-Hamas. You know, it's like, well, you know, last I checked, the passport says American. That's the only thing that's supposed to matter. But of course, and that's not what they think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is controversial at this point, but I am a big believer in the melting pot. And I think intermarriage is actually a big part of that. Now, everybody can have their own individual preferences and desires and for their own family and what they want to do in their own lives. But again, what makes it a big issue is when this is the head of a civil rights organization, an American civil rights organization, decrying intermarriage. That to me is problematic, and again, exposes the tension between Zionist values and liberal values of equality. Let's go ahead to the next one. So this was as part of an interview with Lulu, I always forget her last name, but over at the New York Times. They did a lengthy interview. I actually would encourage you to go and listen to it because it is very interesting. In any case, she processed him a bit on, okay, what do you say to people who say that what Israel is doing is a genocide? What do you think about that? And he claims he doesn't really know about it. He doesn't really know the definition. Shortly after talking about how clarity of words is so important as the head of the ADL, let's go ahead and take a listen to that.
I do feel that my job requires me to have a kind of moral clarity.
And on the use of words.
On the use of words. I do think what's happening in Gaza is a terrible, catastrophic situation. I don't think it's a genocide because that's a legal definition, which means an intentional effort. And I don't have the dictionary in front of me.
I have it here.
But
it says,
intentional. Okay, what does it say?
I mean, it's a UN, right? We should say it's a legal definition. And it says any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, such as killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group.
So in fairness, I don't have that definition in front of me, right? And I haven't read it like you have before this. But what I'll simply say is that I don't believe the Israeli government is committing genocide.
I mean, it's just incredible. At first he's like, well, I haven't looked at the definition. Okay, well, here's the definition.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have it in front of me, and I haven't really thought about it. It's like, yes, I mean, how could you have not thought about it? Yeah. And then there's no, well, here's why I don't think the Israeli government, here's why I don't, here's what the definition, here's why I don't think it fits. It's just, nah, I don't believe that. Yeah. Next question.
Look, I mean, again, it's one thing I think, I've argued here before about the legitimacy of the international law. I think it's fake, and that's part of why I think a lot of these terms are just like not particularly useful. But Greenblatt, if your entire worldview is that the genocide, the Holocaust of the Jewish people is the foundation for why you need the ADL in America and the existence of the state of Israel, then yeah, you probably should think quite a lot about the term genocide and what is or is not a genocide. I actually should go and check their record on the, quote, Armenian genocide or any of these Rwandan genocide, right? I mean, if you go, for example, if you go to the Holocaust Museum here in Washington, D.C., they literally sell like Never Again merch, and they have stuff which highlights the Rwandan genocide, the Armenian genocide, like the mass murder of ethnic subgroups of people. That's built into the Holocaust Museum here in Washington, D.C. So it's a ridiculous thing to say that the ADL or any of these prominent Jewish organizations have not thought about the term when they're the ones who invented the term, basically used the term as some sort of legal architecture from the UN Genocide Conventions in 1948, inventing the Never Again and the R2P doctrine of the 1990s, which was born of the Rwandan genocide. So my point is just like, for him to just sit there now all of a sudden want to like parse every little word, it's like, dude, you sound just like the people. It's like the Turks today who are arguing whether the Armenian genocide was a genocide or not. I'm like, okay, that's part of the reason, by the way, I find the term very tedious sometimes, because it's like, okay, did you murder hundreds of thousands of them or not? Like, what are we talking about here? Yes, the answer is yes, just so everybody is clear. Yeah. I'm sure this will get clipped by the Armenians.
I mean, we should, you guys can go and watch Saagar and I's disagreements about genocide and why I think that term is actually really important and very consequential specifically in this context. But Greenblatt's answer here really actually relates back to his stance on intermarriage, because Zionism is an ideology of Jewish supremacism. That's what it is. It says, it justifies the idea that Jewish people in Israel should have different rights, should have more rights, should reign supreme in that state, and they should be able to directly oppress Palestinians both within the original Israeli borders, and they have completely now subjugated people in both the West Bank and in Gaza. It is a Jewish supremacist ideology. So the prohibition on race mixing makes tons of sense in the context of a Jewish supremacist ideology, and it also is truly, if he's speaking honestly, it is the real reason why he and others won't acknowledge that what Israel is doing is a genocide, because they believe that they, as a Jewish supremacist, that they basically get a pass to do whatever they want to do, and that nothing that they could do could ever constitute a genocide. And you hear this even, in a more, I guess, diplomatic or more sort of liberal-coded answer from Jeremy Ben-Ami when he was debating Mehdi Hassan about the use of the term genocide. And it's basically like, well, it makes me feel bad, so I don't want to use that term because I don't like the way it makes me think about like what Jewish Israelis are supporting and what this means for my whole ideology. And after the fact, apparently after reflection, to his credit, he put on a Substack basically saying like, you know what? I'm no longer going to object to the term. I'm not going to use the term because it still makes me feel bad, but I don't object to the term because I see that this is what is actually happening here. But I think that's truly where the denial comes from. It's because no, it couldn't be us, because he's so steeped in this Jewish supremacist ideology of Zionism that he thinks that it could never be that Israel is committing genocide, no matter, even if they nuked Gaza. He would still insist, no, I just don't believe that Israel is committing genocide in this instance.
Let's talk about the intermarriage thing too. So in Israel, you cannot have interfaith marriage. It's not legal. Like, does anybody know that? For everybody, for all of the, it's an equal country
Western
with
liberal
equal rights.
democracy in the Middle East.
You literally cannot have an interfaith marriage in the state of Israel unless both people convert to the same religion. I'm just telling you the facts. The compromise is they will recognize legal marriage from outside of the country, but they will not perform them inside of the country. Okay, I mean, that's pretty crazy, don't we all think? And I'm not even talking about in the West Bank, where, like you just talked about, where we see this in action, where if you murder somebody and you're Israeli or you're a settler, then you basically have two-tier systems of justice. And if you murder someone and you're a Palestinian, a soldier's going to shoot you in the face, and there's no such thing as due process. And it's basically the opposite, where if you do murder a Palestinian, you're an Israeli settler, not only do you get set free, you're basically a hero in the entire country, and you get free guns, from the government. I'm just telling you what reality is. And so if you look at this, I mean, the fact that interfaith marriage is actually banned inside of the country basically, emphasizes a lot of the core points that he is talking about, and a lot of this like liberal democracy stuff, which they love to trot out. It's a Jewish ethno-state. And by the way, I think ethno-states, broadly, I would look at it as more value neutral in terms of whether it's, quote, good or not, and more in terms of should America tolerate ethno-states? Like, look, we have ethno-states all over the world. Okay, so be it, all right? It's reality. But my point just about it is don't sit here and gaslight me about how you're just like us, because you're actually not, So in their country, I could not marry my wife. That's fucking crazy. Yeah. Don't tell me you live in a Western country. You don't. Yeah. All right? And I could do that in probably, I think, every European democracy, even I have a lot of problems with them, but don't put yourself on the same tier as the rest of us.
Yeah. No, my kid's dad is Jewish.
Yeah, there you go.
And I was thinking about this. I was like, shit, my kid, typically, the Jewish heritage comes from the mother in terms of most, sects of Judaism, although Reform is different. And so I was looking, I was like, do my kids have some kind of like a right to be able to right to return? And sure enough, they do. I'm like, they have no connection. That's insane that they have more right to live there than the Palestinians who've been, like, that just shows you how absolutely insane this state actually is, and what our tax dollars are bolstering and supporting here. And it's been layered over with this idea that this is some liberal democracy, which is total and complete bullshit. Okay, speaking of total and complete bullshit, he also got pressed by Lulu about his equation of anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. Doesn't have a lot of great responses here either. Let's take a listen.
You have equated anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism.
It is.
And I will say that in preparation for this conversation, I talked to a lot of different people. And one of the things I heard is that anti-Zionism for them is a desire to have the rights of Palestinians be equal to the rights of Jews in Israel and the Palestinian territories. The idea of sort of, I guess, the one-state solution, if you will. Is that definition of anti-Zionism to you anti-Semitic?
Well, look, if you believe that only Jewish people don't have the right to self-determination, that's anti-Semitic, because it's holding out Jews to a double standard you don't accord to other people. So if you believe my definition of Zionism, which is really not my definition, it's widely accepted, it's peculiar to me how anti-Zionism isn't the opposite of that. How people choose to interpret it, to embellish it, to sort of dress it up as something other than what it is. But the reality is, if you believe how I laid out Zionism, then anti-Zionism is pretty simple.
I think the challenge is if someone defines their view of anti-Zionism in a way that allows for Jews to exist in a state of Israel, but that grants Palestinians rights, but you're seeing that as anti-Semitic.
And she brings up in this exchange, which is longer, and I encourage you to read it, she actually brings up Ezra Klein's piece, which I think was an intelligent way to go about it, because Ezra's very, first of all, he's Jewish.
Right.
He wrote this piece about the divide in the Jewish community and the way that Israel's genocide is, sort of excising Israel from being a really central focus of Jewish life in America. And he says, I hope I'm not butchering this quote, basically the question isn't, does Israel have a right to exist? Israel does exist. The question is, does Israel have a right to dominate?
Yeah.
And she puts that to him. And again, he just sort of I think they're denying Jewish ability of self-determination. And so my definition is the one that counts. Therefore, that's how I'm defining it. Therefore, anyone who is anti-Zionist is also anti-Semitic. She also presses him at a certain point on the statistics they compile of, anti-Semitic incidents are up 1,000,000% year over year. And it is sort of revealing because he makes this comment. He says, in the 10 years that I've been head of the ADL, anti-Semitic incidents are up some 1,000% or whatever it is. It's well, then aren't you kind of failing at your job?
I think
Isn't that your whole
that.
job is to bring down anti-Semitism? So, maybe your approach is not really particularly working here. Have you thought about that?
Well, it turns out that screaming anti-Semite all the time doesn't particularly do anything about anti-Semitism. It turns out also that really it's about concrete policy action. Most of the things that are branded as anti-Semitic are not anti-Semitic whatsoever and would be laughed at ridiculously, in the context of any other country. But yeah, in particular, his thing about I love that point about it exists. And this, again, I know people don't like this, but this is my assault on the liberal democratic framework, is there's no such thing as right to exist. There is just existence. There's no such thing as, a right to, it's we live in reality. Israel is a nation recognized by X number of states. Thus, it exists. So now what do we do about it? The Palestine was a state that was supposed to be exist, and now it, quote, doesn't exist. It's not about right to exist. It doesn't, and we probably should do something about it. There's no right or not in order to restore peace, which I think is good, right? That's really the way that we should talk about these things. And they try to gaslight you into this right to exist question. It's what are you bitching about? You won already. Not only do you have your own country, you have it beyond the borders of which you originally set out, and actually now you've annexed all this territory in, quote, Greater Israel.
Yeah, does Syria have a right to exist? Does Lebanon have a right to exist?
I mean, by the way,
apparently not, according to the Israelis.
That's my point. And even those states are basically fake and drawn up on, by the British. We could go on forever, but down this rabbit hole. So the point is no, Syria exists as a polity. Now, does it make sense? Probably not. If you really look at it from the past, should we do anything about it? It's kind of more up to them. Should we let Israel dictate its neighbors' politics and cause problems for us? Let's again center ourselves in that equation. No, that's ridiculous. And it's the same for the entire region. That's the point. And actually, it all comes back to the point around America and the way that we should think about this is it's not just the question about slaughtering of Palestinians and the strategic goal. It's about, do we want to be wholly responsible for and alienate this entire region of which we are somewhat dependent on for oil and make it so that they can militarily dominate and conquer vast swaths around this. At the same time, we're going around the world preaching about how all borders are sacrosanct after World War II, and we can't allow any domination or violation of liberal norms. What ground do we have to stand on with the Ukraine-Russia conflict when Gaza is going on?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
And that is so true. And there's another parallel with Russia, Ukraine as well, which is both our undying commitment to Israel no matter what, which we'll talk more about in the next segment, the Israel First segment, and our commitment to making Russia always and forever an enemy state.
Yes.
Both of these are obsessive Cold War ideologies. The reason we were so into Israel is because we saw them as an ally against Russia in the Cold War in an area where, Russian communist, left-wing ideology was ascendant. So that's why we were in love with Israel. The Cold War is over. At least that Cold War is over. And yet we still are hanging on to this. And so, when you ask Alyssa Slotkin, why are they an ally? It's well, they just are. And it doesn't matter what use they serve or how much trouble it causes us or how much it costs us or how much it embroils this region. It's just they're an ally and that's it. And now I'm going to shut my brain off and these ones are adversaries and that's it. And that can never change or, is completely permanently immovable as well. Who wants to view the world that way?
I mean, people should really go back and read history. A major reason that the state of Israel was even recognized by Harry Truman is because at one point he had a business partner in his haberdashery who was Jewish, who connected him with the Zionist, with a Zionist preacher who allowed to get himself in the Oval. I'm not joking. George Marshall, the architect of the Marshall Plan of the modern American empire, literally told Truman that he would not vote for him in the upcoming election if he recognized Israel because he thought it was a terrible idea. General Eisenhower, the victor of World War II, he was General Eisenhower, the victor of World War II in the 1950s during the Suez Crisis and all of that, was very willing to be who the fuck do you think you are going around here with the British and the French trying to, basically have some conquest here in Egypt? That's not happening. This modern cult, it did not exist back in the day, to the point where many, many of the architects of the American empire thought that the recognition of the state of Israel was a disastrous idea that would be counter to American interests in the Middle East. You can read a book if you want to. It's all public record. Now, of course, they don't want everybody to really know the truth. They think this special bond has existed since time. But, I mean, if it weren't for Truman's Jewish haberdashery partner, we literally may not have the entire modern state. I wish I was joking. It's true.
Well, and, it's one thing when Israel is screwing up our foreign policy, but I think part of why there has been such a revolt against Israel, on the entire Democratic side and increasingly among young Republicans as well, is because of the way now Americans' rights and what we're allowed to say are being directly curtailed. And ADL's Jonathan Greenblatt gets asked about the censorship that this government is engaging in to quash any sort of pro-Palestine protest, deporting anyone who wrote an op-ed that they didn't approve of, et cetera. And he acknowledges that he worked with the Biden administration on those efforts and works now with the Trump administration on those efforts as well. Let's take a listen to that.
I have worked with the prior education secretary and I've worked with this education secretary. And I credit the Biden administration for their national strategy to counter anti-Semitism, a really important document. No one had done what the Biden administration had done before in elevating anti-Semitism to a federal priority. And ADL, in full disclosure, worked with them on that. And they get a lot of credit for adopting the plan. And then I give credit to the Trump administration for actually implementing aspects of the plan and taking a strong view, again, in the face of real, not imagined, real acts of hate, real acts of discrimination. Again, we helped to write the national strategy to counter anti-Semitism, released by the Biden administration. We were deeply involved in that.
So again, this head of a quote-unquote civil rights organization wants to trample on your rights in service of his Israel first Jewish supremacist ideology and is working aggressively with whatever, bipartisan, Democrat, Republican. Trump has certainly taken it beyond his wildest ambitions. He is happy to work with them in service of trying to crush your ability to speak out against your tax dollars going to fund genocide.
Yep, it's totally crazy, but look, I mean, I think one good thing is that people are starting to see this organization for what it is. For years, it was a heroic organization amongst the left because it called out white supremacy. It just rings a little hollow when you're also talking about intermarriage for yourselves. So don't be telling us and warning with the boogeyman when the boogeyman may be amongst us the entire time.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.